Hello, dear friends. I'm recording in advance, and my topic today is Pirkei Avot, chapter 2, Mishnah 13, which is the way it is in the Mishnayot, not necessarily in the Sidur, and is the statement of Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon, who is a student of Yochanan ben Zakkai, one of the 5 students who are mentioned in the second chapter as being, I guess, the top students of Yochanan ben Zakkai. And 2 of the 5, the previous one we spoke about, Rabbi Yossi, is a Kohen, and so is Rabbi Shimon, called Rabbi Shimon a Kohen. We don't know a lot about these students because they don't have a lot of sayings. Both Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon are mentioned in the Talmud Yerushalmi, Chagiga, and they seem to have had also talents of understanding the secrets of Torah and the secrets of the chariot, based on what it says there. What I'd like to do is, before I read I'm going to read the Mishnah of 13, the statement of Rabbi Shimon, which is, of course, again, a threefold statement, like all the students of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, and try to understand how it relates to the previous things said about him in this chapter. Rabbi Shimon says, "Havei zahir b'kriyat shema b'tefillah." Be very careful about reciting the Shema, which is, of course, the paragraphs that we recite in the morning and the evening service, u'b'tefillah, and reciting of the Shmoneh Esrei, the silent Amidah, which, of course, a lot of the Mefarshim say, be careful to do it in its proper time. U'kshatam yitpalel, and when you do pray, al ta'asat tfilatcha keva, do not make your prayer burdenous. Keva really means constant. So if it's constant, it's like a burden. We actually have this in the Talmud in Brachot, in the name of Rabbi Lezer, also where he says not to make your tefillah kavua and to add something to it to make it more creative and more personal. Which is interesting because Rabbi Lezer is also one of these students of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. So don't make your tefillah, don't make your prayer something which is regular. Ela rachamim v'tachanunim, make it in a sense something which has innovation. It could be, of course, innovation of ideas. It could even possibly be innovation of intent and enthusiasm, but it seems to be also of things that are added to the content. So make them rachamim v'tachanunim, recitals of mercy and supplication before God. As it says in Yoel, he's giving an example. Kiel chanum rachumu. God is a God of compassion and a God of chanina, is almost like grace, sometimes is translated. Erech Apayim, who is slow to anger. Rav Chesed does abundant amount of kindness. V'nicham al ha'ra'ah, and forgives evil. And the third thing is, al tihi rasha b'fnei atzmecha, do not consider yourself evil. So what are these 3 things? Let's go back a moment and to see what was said about Rabbi Shimon in the previous Mishnayot. As I said, all these things are connected. So there were 5 students of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, and about Rabbi Shimon Ben Netanel, it says Yerei Chet, that he fears sin. You know, very often we think of somebody fearing sin or fearing heaven, Yerei Shamayim. Already in Ramchal's Mesilat Yesharim, he says that people have mistaken concepts, notions of what it means to be God-fearing. They think that the God-fearing person is the one who reads Tehillim all day and lives a very secluded life, but that's not about God-fearing. He says that's maybe part of it. It could be symptomatic, but God-fearing is what is in your mind and how you understand your relationship to God and your relationship to human beings and relationship to this world. That's all part of God-fearing. The symptomatic part, the external things, that's secondary. Anybody can take a book of Tehillim and pretend to be God-fearing, but actually to be so is a mindset. Now, it also says about Shimon Ben Netanel that is Yerei Chet, he fears sin. Rabbi Kook writes in his book Musar Avicha, he says you have levels of a relationship with God. Actually, he says it's fearing sin is a lower level than fearing God. But I'm assuming here that fearing sin means fearing God in this particular Mishnah. But Rabbi Kook tries to deal with this psychologically and analyze it. He says, unfortunately, there's some people who fear sin but don't fear God. So it's supposed to be part and parcel. Now, I'm sure that Rabbi Shimon Ben Netanel, especially as somebody who is involved in the Merkava, his fear of sin was a direct fear of God. And if we find that we can notice in the Bible that when it says about something they are God-fearing in the Bible, it usually means that they are an ethical person. Take, for instance, Avraham. When Avraham is asked by Abimelech why he said that Sarah is his sister and not his wife. So Abraham says, I knew that there is no fear of God in this place, and therefore they're going to kill me to get my wife. Fear of God leads to ethical behavior. This is the idea of Abraham in Breshit. The same thing when the brothers at the end of Breshit turn to Joseph, and they're afraid that after Jacob dies, that Joseph is going to look for retribution against them. So, and they start saying, our father said before he died, you have to act nicely to us, whatever, and forgive it, whatever. And Joseph said, don't worry, et Elohim ani yareh, I fear God. So when Joseph says, I fear God, it means because I fear God, I'm going to act in the right way. So you don't have to worry about that. So in general, fear of God, therefore, means acting proper way. If you remember also in the flood story, in the Parsha of Noach, it says, "Vatishachet haaretz lifnei ha'Elohim vatimalei haaretz chamas." There was the earth was corrupt before God, and therefore it was full of sin and corruption. Here, sin, chamas particular, means stealing. Because if there's no fear of God, why not steal if you can get away with it? So Rabbi Shimon Ben Netanel is called Yerei Chet. He's worried about sin. Now, what does it mean to be Yerei Chet? Because in the next Mishnah in Tet, which we had also previously, when they said, what are the things that you should keep away from? And Rabbi Shimon Ben Netanel said, what you have to keep away from, the worst transgressions are haloveh ve'eino mishalem. When you take a loan, don't pay it back. And it's interesting that same Shimon Ben Gamliel, when they say, what is a good character trait? He says, haroet hanolad, somebody who was able to anticipate what's going to happen. In other words, if you want to be a person who is fearing of God and fearing of sin, you have to anticipate the results of your actions in order not to hurt people. It's not enough not to hurt people. You have to think in advance of what you're doing and how it's going to have consequences. And therefore, he says the worst thing, therefore, on the other side to keep away from is don't take loans that you're not going to be able to pay back. Think the consequences of your actions. It's interesting, this reminds me of the famous statement of Rav Chaim Volozhin in the name of the Vilna Gaon, which is found in the She'otot literature, which I just published a book about recently here in Israel in May, called Conversations Rav Chaim Volozhin had with the students of the yeshiva. And in the Padro collection manuscript, one of the interesting quotes in the name of the Vilna Gaon is that the main purpose of the divine service, the service before God of a human being in this world, is the transgressions between man and his fellow, which means not to hurt people. We're here in this world first and foremost, not to hurt people. That's Rabbi Shimon Ben Netanel speaking, much before the Vilna Gaon. Don't take loans you're not going to pay back. Understand the consequences of your actions. Yiroet hanolad, the wise one knows the future is going to bring. Now let's go back to the Mishnah of today, Mishnah 13, and within that, try to re-understand it. First of all, he says, be very careful about Shema and Tefillah in your relationship to God. It's not just a relationship to God, there's also halakha. There are constraints. Don't feel that because you're getting into enthusiasm, live within the constraints of the halakha, because it's not only about how you feel at this moment. Life needs its borders and its constraints, and there's a reason why the sages. So even Shema and Tefillah, which is the height, the Shema is actually not a prayer, it's a recital and an affirmation of a belief in one God. So even when you're doing this, which is a central part of our belief, and the Tefillah, we're relating to God, keep it within the constraints of the halakha, because remember, you're within a system and there's a value to that system. Because people sometimes, religiosity is a very powerful and potent thing, and it can relieve a person to breaking the vessels, to breaking out of the confinements and thinking that we are greater than we are, and actually bring to a certain arrogance. So there's a value to having things within its proper time. Secondly, don't let prayer stagnate. Don't let it become stale. Don't let it become regular. Don't let it become of this sort of daily routine, which it easily can be. Try to make it something full of compassion, supplication. Make it personal. Because God is a God of compassion. We have to learn in Imitatio Dei how to do that too. And God can forgive evil, but we have to mean it. So, therefore, if you make your prayer into something which is more than routine, there's a chance that things will change. And the third thing he says is, Al tihi rasha b'fnei atzmecha. Do not consider yourself evil. Because if you consider yourself evil, it's all over. Your self-perception is going to create the image of you which you are going to be. If you think you are evil, you will become evil. If you think that you have the potential of becoming righteous, but are humble about it, move towards that potential, and you will be righteous eventually. You will fall, because it says, Kisheva yipol tzadik v'kam, that the righteous one falls 7 times, but gets up. And if your default position is standing and not falling, you will become that righteous person you want to. But keep in mind, understand the consequences of your actions, ro'eh et hanolad, and keep in mind not to take loans that you're not going to pay back, meaning even simple things in the relationship between human beings. We have to understand not to hurt people, understand the consequences of our actions. And a relationship to God, don't overdo your enthusiasm in the sense that it breaks the boundaries of halakha, because there's a reason for the boundaries of halakha. It keeps us steady with an anchor in this world, because it's easy for the religious and the spiritual side of man to blow us into an otherworldly situation. And Shimon Ben Netanel knew a lot about that because he was involved in dealing with the secrets of the chariot, which could easily remove a person from this world, like it did according to the Talmud to Ben Azai. And when you do pray, make it real supplication, and remember, your self-perception is going to decide who you are. You perceive yourself as evil, it's going to be all over. You perceive yourself as the possibility of being righteous, going to move you forward and advance you. I bid everybody, shalom, shalom. Chodesh Tov.